that would obviously take the profit out of the business. The idea that somehow or other we ought to treat drugs as a free good. There are no free goods. There's no free lunch. It's not free. Somebody would have to pay for it. So we ought to tax the taxpayer to subsidize people who do drugs. But more important, the failure of anybody who says it like that not immediately to see that what would happen to those free drugs is that they would be distributed in Europe and elsewhere where there's a paying market. How do you restrict the quantity demanded of free drugs? Obviously, the only way you restrict it is by having strict rules for distributing it. So you get into a situation where you would have an authoritarian system to distribute those drugs to make sure it wasn't abused. Number two, I promise you, these are honest-to-God quotes from letters I read. I haven't made them up. Legalize all drugs now illegal, to be available only in state stores. Now we've got a lot of experience with state stores in the alcohol area, in the liquor area. In the repeal of the Prohibition Amendment, what was repealed was federal prohibition. States were left free to engage in any measures they wanted to control alcohol. And indeed, the 23rd Amendment? The amendment that repealed the 18th specified that carrying alcohol or liquor from a dry state to a wet state shall be regarded as a federal offense and shall be prevented by the federal government. I've forgotten the exact wording. And one of the ways in which states differ was that many states proceeded to set up state liquor stores. Now, the people who say it should be distributed only in state stores argue, well, that would be a way in which you could control the distribution of minors, make sure it wasn't abused, etc., etc. If you look at the behavior of liquor stores, I know about the state of New Hampshire best because we used to have a summer place, a second home there. That's located right on the border of Massachusetts in order to attract as many customers over from Massachusetts as possible. And many states have now discovered that they're not really doing very well with the state stores, and there's a movement on to sell them off and privatize. Again, it's a silly idea. C, abolish the criminality of the use of drugs. Establish a federal monopoly to sell them. That is, you're going to have the post office handle the distribution of drugs. Now, what do these solutions have in common? They're going to cure a problem caused by socialism. By some more socialism. It's the standard recourse of the alcoholic. More of the hair of the dog that fits you to get over the hangover, the inevitable hangover. The fundamental problem we face is not the war on drugs. Some of us are most interested in that aspect. But it's only part of a much broader war. The war on drugs and the harm which it does is simply a manifestation of a much broader problem. The substitution of political mechanisms for market mechanisms in a wide variety of areas. To illustrate, I want to go beyond the war on drugs. We all recognize that the war on drugs is destroying our inner cities. But if I were to ask any one of you, what is the next most important element in destroying the inner cities? I suspect a great many of you would agree with me that the next most important element is what is happening to our educational system. The terrible schools in our inner cities. Schools which do not teach, but which are essentially places to keep kids off the streets for a certain number of hours a day. Both failures have exactly the same sources. The war on drugs is a failure because it's a socialist enterprise. Our schooling is deteriorating because it's a socialist enterprise. Except possibly for the military, education is the largest socialist enterprise in the United States. There very, very profitable and good to a small group of people, and does an enormous amount of harm to a lot of people. That was true of socialism in Russia, it was true of socialism in Poland, it was true of socialism, and it's true of socialism in the United States. Governmental programs. You all know Adam Smith's famous invisible hand, in which people who intend to promote their own interest are led by an invisible hand to promote a public interest which was no part of their intention to promote. And I have for many years argued that there's an inversion of that, which is true. People who intend only to pursue the public interest are led by an invisible hand to promote private interest, which was no part of their intention to pursue. That's the case in the drug case. Whose interests are served by the drugs? The U.S. government enforces a drug cartel. The major beneficiaries from the drug prohibition are the drug lords, who can maintain a cartel which they would be unable to maintain. In the education area, the major beneficiaries from the socialized educational program are high-income people living in affluent suburbs who are able to have good public schools, and those public schools serve as a tax shelter for them. If they sent their children to private schools, the tuition they pay is not deductible on their taxes, but if they pay local taxes, that is deductible. And the great mass of people are harmed by the very low quality and declining quality of our schooling system. And the people who are harmed worst of all are the people who live in the inner cities. And these are by no means the only examples. Examine our major national concerns, of which the crime and lawlessness that drug prohibition has spawned is certainly one, and the poor educational performance another. And go on down the list. We have major problems in medical care, with total costs for medical care rising from 4% of the national income to 13% in 40 years. Why? Again, because the government has increasingly socialized medical care, and there is a very strong movement to move all the way to a complete socialization of medical care. In the course of that, the cost of a day spent in a hospital, cost per patient day, in 1989 was 26 times as high after adjustment for inflation as it was in 1946. And the major, in my opinion, the major reason was the growth of socialism in medical care. Look at housing. Why does the Bronx in New York look like a war zone that's just been bombed? Primarily because of rent control. Again, an attempt by the government to socialize the housing industry. We have had extensive and expensive public housing programs. In the course of those public housing programs, more dwelling units have been destroyed than have been built. I challenge you to find any major problem in the United States, any major problem, which you cannot trace back to the misuse of political mechanisms as opposed to market mechanisms.